Welcome to our presentation. I'm Sarah Warren, and I am here today with my colleague Jedd Willis, and we would like to share our experience of working together in yeah, delivering an online workshop to our academic colleagues. So in doing that, we reflect through a First Nations culturally appropriate lens.
I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the Wadawurrung and Bunurong lands that Sarah and I are presenting from today. Our research was developed and originated from Wadawurrung country. So I'd like to pay my respects to Wadawurrung elders past, present and emerging, and extend those respects to any First Nations people here today.
Thank you.
My name is Jedd Willis. I'm a Palawa-Gangulu man living and working on Wadawurrung country and studying at Federation University. My work is grounded in Australian First Nations ways of knowing, being and doing, and through my responsibility to caring for country. Our research collaboration is aimed at supporting respectful engagement between Western knowledge systems and First Nations knowledge systems in order to foster a future where those systems can operate symbiotically.
So I'd like to say that I come from a non-Indigenous background. I'm a learning designer and registered teacher of European and Estonian refugee heritage. And I work on Wadawurrung country at Federation University. So I'd just like to elaborate more on the positionality part. So because we've got an international audience today, just wanted to expand on the reason why that's important. So a researcher, Sara Wolfen, she proposes the notion of critical self-reflection, particularly in the space of like non-Indigenous positionality. So she argues that educators should reflect on who they are, where they come from, so they understand how their knowledge and values and experiences shape their interpretation of curriculum. So this process of self-reflection is a really important step in challenging the taken for granted assumptions and towards also supporting decolonising approaches to education. So we're here today to talk about our pre-service teacher placement. So at Federation University, we have a diversity placement. It goes for 15 days as part of their teacher education program. And diversity placements are experiences that occur outside the normal school classroom. Traditionally, placements have been arranged in settings like diversity placement settings have been arranged in like alternative schools, museums, art galleries, holiday programs, farm programs, and like remote rural locations. So the goal of placement is to meet the requirements of the Australian Professional Standards for Teachers, or APST. And that's through how we did that in this experience is through developing, building, and delivering an online workshop. So this included incorporating a variety of activities, establishing relationships, consulting with cultural advisors, and initiating connections with internal and external agencies. So Jedd, would you like to?
Yeah, so that's right. As part of this placement, I developed an online workshop on Australian First Nations peoples' perspectives in regards to policy, practice, protocols for criminology. The participants that this workshop was delivered to were academics and professors in the criminology space. The main form of communication we used was online, a Teams meeting. So online forum, which posed a few challenges in the way of cultural inclusivity and cultural practices. But I was able to overcome them and found it a rather rewarding experience.
So just on the end of that, as a non-Indigenous educator and mentor, I also, in this experience, work towards valuing, privileging and promoting traditional knowledges and cultural practices through my work in education and through my actions and words. So the significance of this particular experience and the research that's coming from that is that there's within the literature it talks around this topic, but doesn't specifically mention this unique context. So we've got existing literature on Indigenous-led learning design, where it highlights Indigenous graduates working with other experts. We've got Rethinking Online Learning Design, which talks about the learning design considerations for Australian First Nations students. We've got Indigenous students on placement. It speaks of the lived experience of Australian First Nations students. And the learning design role within pre-service teacher education. So that's looking at the learning designer and how that role is used to educate pre-service teachers in design-based, in design thinking. But that was embedded like within the business leadership and coaching domain. So there's a few case studies that looked at the idea of internships, but there's not anything that specifically looks at an Australian First Nations pre-service teacher within a learning design placement space and analysing and reflecting on the positionality and the power dynamics and the pedagogical considerations. So the significance, I guess, of this is, the pre-service teacher became the educator. The academics were the students. So the traditional hierarchy was flipped, and it all happened within this online space. So, this isn't an ordinary placement, and it really highlighted that the differences that occurred. So you might be wondering about Ganma. What's this Ganma all about? So as you can see here, there's a quote from Marika. She's describing what Ganma is and where it comes from. So it's a word that comes from the Yolngu community up in northeast Arnhem Land. And it is the meeting of freshwater and saltwater coming together and in a space that is representative of equality, respect, and a meeting of knowledges and shared knowledge creation. So the Yolngu peoples use this term Ganma to describe a place where the fresh water meets the salty seawater. And it's within this lens that we're using as a guiding principle towards our ability to interpret and reflect on this education diversity placement. We had considered, originally I had considered geoethnography, and then I realised how Western-centric that was. And through further reading, I found a concept of a two-eyed methodology that's based in Canada. And I thought, no, there must be an Australian context. So, looking further, I had found this and felt that was far more appropriate. So, methodology. Obviously, it's a qualitative research design. We were looking at the lived experience and understanding that through Ganma. So the active reflexivity, that on my part, that happened through looking at my own cultural positioning, my biases, my capability and suitability as a non-Indigenous researcher mentor. And that was active throughout. Together, we designed and created a research agreement form, and that was based on the code of ethics that we have here in Australia. And it's grounded in core values of integrity, equity, reciprocity, respect, responsibility, and cultural continuity. So with the Ganma mindset, it was really important to have a shared creation of the agreement that was to be able to make sure that the research was conducted with informed consent and promoted an Australian First Nations self-determination and decision-making at the forefront. Things like artifacts that were collected with things like the planning, the notes, reflections, discussions, advice and feedback, and face-to-face discussion of the placement was recording about our lived experience. So there was an opportunity to review the data as part of the verification process with explicit understanding of the ethics guide that states that Indigenous cultural and intellectual property rights are to stay with the peoples of that culture. So in that respect, thematic reductionism or coding was not appropriate. So the data maintained is in the original format with only self-made annotations. So in planning this placement, it was really important also to consider the ethical components. So looking at the fact that Jedd was an education student and he was conducting this placement with a learning designer that worked in the education area, like in education institute. I had to make sure that the staff and the areas that he were interacting with were not the lecturers that he would be having as his own teachers and tutors into the future. That was to mitigate privacy concerns and conflict of interest. So I was also mindful of my role as a support. So doing things like encouraging and organising engagement with advisors and research advisors, all of whom were Australian First Nation peoples as well, just to avoid things like harm or avoid deficit narratives or stereotyping or exploitation and things like that can happen within this space. We wanted to avoid those sorts of things.
So our findings from this project were that despite my initial concerns about online education creating barriers in relational practice, we found that the online environment was almost an asset, if anything, in this situation where the power dynamics had been flipped. So I found that by meeting online, we were able to negate that issue of anxiety, where being in the room with maybe somebody who's ordinarily in a position of power over you, you may not feel as comfortable to speak as freely as we did online. It was also found that despite my initial apprehension, culturally responsive practice can occur online. With some context that what I'm talking about there is Australian First Nations people, we tend to prefer to engage face-to-face to foster that sense of connection. And that was my concern around the online space, was removing that. But we managed to work with that quite well. We were able to develop a rapport through the online means, which was another concern that I had. But so authenticity remained challenging in some spaces digitally, but we managed to do very well with maintaining an authentic teaching and learning occurrence. And I think that was mainly due to our incorporation of the Didiri principle of active listening, which is an Australian First Nations principle of, we call it listening from the heart. So maintaining an open mind and a caring frame when listening and remaining fully involved in what's happening. Just to move on to the next slide, we noticed that the traditional power relations were disrupted when the academics became the learners in this situation. And, you know, it was quite a unique situation where myself as an undergraduate education student, I was seen as a knowledge holder or an expert in this environment where I was talking to people who I personally look up to as, you know, lecturers, senior lecturers, even professors. So it was quite a unique environment and provided a really rewarding experience for me to be in a space where First Nations, Australian First Nations knowledges were prioritised and they were held as authoritative. And the whole aim of the project was to increase academic knowledge of how to embed Australian First Nations knowledges and perspectives into the units of work within criminology. Before the workshop, I was quite nervous. I was struggling with the whole concept of, oh my golly, I'm going to go in and I'm going to actually have to be an expert in a room full of people who are used to being the expert in every room they're in. However, once we got into the workshop and once we got going, I was quite confident and was quite comfortable in that space and managed to, after all was said and done, managed to feel quite triumphant with myself for a job well done.
So what we experienced was a growth in cultural competence. So for myself, I adopted a learning mindset and engaged heavily in the active reflexivity space. I found that the cultural responsiveness, it really requires a sense of humility, and you need to be able to consult and go out and find out things when you don't know them. So, you know, knowing that there's knowledge gaps that exist, and there may be knowledge out there that, you know, you're simply not allowed to know, and to be able to know that that's okay, and that, you know, you can rest easy in that space. Being comfortable with uncertainty, and approaching this work with respect and curiosity was absolutely essential.
Yeah, definitely. So along with that, my experience, although I am an Australian First Nations person, I am still on a journey of self-discovery, particularly within culture. I'm not sure about how many people would know about the history of Australian First Nations people, but we had what we call the stolen generations, which caused a lot of cultural disconnect. And a lot of fellow Australian First Nations people are still on this journey of discovering what their culture is and trying to learn as much as they can about a culture that has been disconnected. So this program was beneficial for me in that way because I was able to forge connections with people and programs that were able to build those relationships to increase my cultural knowledge, which was quite exciting. But it's put me in a place where I'm more aware of my culture now, and I'm excited to pass it on to the next generation.
And just touching on the part about critical self-positioning, so what that involved was looking at my own position in relation to others. So critically reflecting on how my culture has shaped my worldview, identifying the privileges and like even the disadvantages that influence my perspective and how that affects or influences the way that I mentor and the way that I relate to others. So I was constantly asking things like, how can I do this differently? And what else is there that I need to know?
Yeah, exactly. We also experienced a lot of cross-disciplinary connections. So throughout the university and the community as a whole, we came up with a number of findings through that, which were that engagement must be international. We can't just stagnate in engaging in local events and local awareness of these issues. It has to be a global issue. Preparation is key for these things. Building relationships with people, not only people who are like-minded, but people who can challenge and grow your understanding of concepts, particularly in Australian First Nations culture. We must plan and create a space for different knowledges to be collaboratively incorporated into a space. So bringing an equal footing where Western knowledge and First Nations knowledge can coexist is a really unique and amazing opportunity that we need to facilitate. That said, though, in a space like we were at working, we need to privilege First Nations knowledges just because of the nature of the program and the content that we were teaching. So throughout this program, we came across a few tensions, which is what we called our complexities. So some of the things we ran into were conducting relationally appropriate and care-centered pedagogies in an online space. Like I touched on earlier, we were trying to be as culturally authentic as possible while limited to an online space. Providing authentic First Nations knowledge, which was a really key one because, like I touched on in the previous slide, I am a First Nations person and I am still learning culture. So making sure that I wasn't teaching anything that was sacred knowledge or knowledge that I wasn't allowed to teach, making sure I wasn't teaching anything that I wasn't 100% sure of, because I am still on that journey of discovering the many wonderful complexities of my culture. So we had some barriers due to time constraints, a lack of funding, and institutional expectations. So staff were not funded to attend face-to-face. So we were limited to an online space only.
Yeah, we found that created a large cultural disconnect. It's been completely ignored. So how to fix that into the future, we can discuss that more in another set of research. So despite the tensions and the difficulties that we had some really overwhelmingly positive feedback from the academic staff while they were students in the workshop. And this is just, I guess, demonstrating the recognition and appreciation that they felt towards the Australian First Nations pre-service teacher, who was the expert and the knowledge holder, and he conducted a fabulous workshop. So Jedd, you should be very proud of yourself.
Thank you.
So implications for practice, like, yeah, critical self-positioning. Reflect on who you are, where you come from, understand your knowledge, values, and experience, like what experiences and how it shapes your worldview. Also, relationship building is paramount. So part of all successful collaborations, develop relationships first. And that active reflexivity is like, how can I do things differently? You know, what else do I need to know? How can I show up more authentically with my words and with my actions?
Yeah, that's right. And another important key is to ask whose knowledge is being centered. So questioning the validity and considering, goodness, alternative worldviews and knowledges. So making sure that you're not stuck in a one sort of stuck in a one track mind, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Making sure that you're maintaining an open mind. Being mindful of colonial load is another really important key factor. So, as an Australian First Nations person, it's not necessarily our job to educate Western people, Western knowledge holders on our culture, and to conduct cultural activities just because we happen to be of Australian First Nations heritage. So things like acknowledgements and welcomes to country shouldn't be just assumed. Welcomes are a different bag of fish. Obviously, you can't do a welcome to country if you're not First Nations, and especially from that particular nation that you're doing it for. And to consider existing knowledge, what are your prior biases, and what prior knowledge do your students have when you're dealing with this subject? So knowing what they're capable of is essential, and maintaining a stimulating environment for a range of abilities.
So you might ask, so what? Which is fair question. So this experience just suggests a different pathway to working as an educator and a different pathway to working within higher education. It's quite legitimate pathway, and it definitely like work towards achieving the Australian professional standards for teachers. And yeah, so that goal was met quite well.
I believe that online learning design should be embedded into teacher education as a legitimate education skill set. As we've heard today, we are moving towards a world where online education could very potentially be the future. So learning how to do that effectively is quite important. This project demonstrates how the online space can allow and facilitate the inversion of traditional hierarchies, where like we spoke about, the pre-service teacher is placed in a position of power and expertise. And we have shown that positioning the Australian First Nations pre-service teacher as that expert is beneficial and very valid in an educational context.
And I know we're running out of time, so just mentioning future potential, you know, this experience provides leverage towards people like Jedd establishing an academic career in higher education. So that's really exciting, and it's great to be able to come here and share these ideas and find out, you know, other new ideas from the amazing people that have been here at this conference, and the networking opportunities that this forum provides.
I would like to express my sincere gratitude to the Australian First Nations Curriculum Cultural Advisor and the Australian First Nations Academic and Research Cultural Advisor for their guidance, advice, and expert input into this placement and research, as well as to Professor Karen Felstead, who couldn't be here today, but I'd like to thank her for her positive support and oversight of this research.
And I know that I'll put questions here, but I don't know that we've got time for that. So thank you very much. And there's some references.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation. It's very interesting. I believe that this area is less explored area, and I can see a lot of potential. And indeed, you are an expert in the area, Jedd. Yeah, it's very, very interesting. But I will maybe give one question if anyone has one question. We're actually run out of time, but I have one question. Okay, so there is no any question, but I do have one question. It's very interesting. Yeah, it's common for online learning, and you mentioned that one of the challenge was making it authentic, in online learning to make cultural practices, which is very. At the same time, you mentioned in some ways you have been able to mitigate that kind of problem with some strat. I was wondering what strategies did you use to make that happen, because it may have also implication for other practices who are struggling to make online things authentic in online learning.
I think, did you want to take this one, Sarah, or do you want me to? No worries. I think the most effective strategy that I used was just remaining authentic myself and approachable, making sure that I was very clear with the participants about my knowledge and what I did and didn't know, and that just making sure that they knew it was okay that they didn't know everything, and that's why we're here.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much, and I hope the conversation will go beyond this conference. And thank you again, and I will proceed to the next presentation.